Hey everyone, I'm Lavania, and welcome to the very first episode of The Junk Box, a series where I take an old, bad, or otherwise unloved archetype and try to breathe some new life into it and build something playable. For this first episode, the archetype I'm pulling out of the proverbial junk box is Watts. So without further ado, let's get started and have a look at the deck. So for those who don't know, Watts are an archetype of light, thunder-type monsters that debuted in the Shining Darkness way back in the 5Ds era. The archetype's main gimmick is having a bunch of monsters with low stats and effects that disrupt the opponent or prevent them from doing things that generally activate when the monster battles. Now, you may be starting to see the problem here, being that this is a battle-based archetype, where the strongest main deck monster has a mind-blowing 1200 attack points, which just isn't gonna cut it in battle unless your opponent's turn 1 is normal summon swap frog pass. That's why the best monsters in the archetype are the ones, like Watt Cobra, that can attack directly and bypass monster combat entirely and get their effects when they deal battle damage via direct attack. This deck is going to be based mostly around those monsters. The archetype also has a variety of spell and trap support, most of which is mediocre to terrible attack boosts and other combat tricks that just aren't useful in 2021, the one exception being Watt Train, the legacy support card the archetype got in Chaos Impact. Finally, being a 5Ds era deck, the archetype does have some tuners and a couple of in-archetype synchro monsters, but it has a lot of trouble actually putting them on the field because almost nothing in the deck says special summon, so the synchros don't end up playing much of a role in the deck. So as for the actual cards in the deck, the Watt lineup is 3 Watt Cobras, 2 Watt Giraffes, 2 Watt Pheasants, 2 Watt Foxes, and 3 copies of honorary archetype member Thunder Seahorse. Of these, your direct attackers are Cobra, Giraffe, and Pheasant, with Cobra being by far the most important of the 3. When Cobra deals battle damage by a direct attack, you can search your deck for any Watt monster, and I do mean any. You can search another copy of Cobra, which is fantastic, right? Your main resource loop in the deck is going to be poking with Cobras, getting more Cobras, and building up an advantage that way. As an added bonus, Cobra activates in the damage step, meaning it can't be ashed, which is pretty nifty on your main searcher. Next, when Giraffe deals battle damage, your opponent can't activate card effects for the rest of the turn. That means no monsters, no spells, no traps. And on paper, that's a really powerful effect. But in practice, it ends up being just like so-so. You don't really have strong follow-up in main phase 2 to make use of the fact that your opponent can't interact with you. And honestly, most of the time, all Giraffe ends up doing is baiting negates, because the effect looks scary to your opponent, even though it isn't really scary in reality. If it goes off, it'll occasionally save you from an end phase Twin Twisters or something, but often it won't do much more than that. Then, Watt Pheasant, I think, is the weakest of the direct attackers. When it deals damage, you can banish a monster on the field until the end phase, which is just... eh. I mean, it's kind of a worse Giraffe in my mind. It can bait negates, it doesn't do much else. I run 2 of it because I run Thunder Seahorse, but, in a vacuum, I don't think it would be worth running more than 1 outside of that card. Next up is 2 Watt Fox. This is the deck's tuner monster. Its main purpose here is to go into Watt Chimera, the deck's boss monster, but it does also have an effect that usually isn't relevant. When it's destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect, you get the same effect as Giraffe. Your opponent can't activate anything for the rest of the turn, which again is a powerful effect on paper, but your opponent needs to destroy it, so it's just not reliable enough. Then Thunder Seahorse is just a real good Yu-Gi-Oh card. We're playing a slow Thunder deck that doesn't special summon much, so it's basically just 3 pluses. It can even search more copies of itself for some reason, which is kinda wild. So that's just really, really good value over a couple turns. Fantastic card. Then I run 3 copies of Watt Train. This is the legacy support card I mentioned earlier. When it's activated, you can add Watt cards from your deck to your hand, up to the number of Thunder-type monsters you control with different names. And when Watt Train's in the graveyard, you can banish it to summon as many Watts with different names from your hand as possible, but not in the same turn Train went to the graveyard. Honestly, as legacy support goes, this could have been a bit better, honestly. But it's still very good, and we still want to play 3 of it. The search is nice, even though you're usually only searching 1 card, because you don't swarm the board very much. And the summon effect is kinda slow, because you have to wait a turn, and can be a bit awkward because it must summon as many as possible, so you can't hold back resources to play around torrential tribute or the like. But it's still something the deck wants to be able to do, so we still want to play 3 of it. It's important to note that Watching can search any Wat card, not just monsters, which is why the last Wat card in the deck is Wat Cancel, a counter trap that you discard a Wat monster to negate the summon of a monster and destroy it. This card is nice. It's a counter trap that can be searched by train, which is great. I wouldn't play more than one because the discard cost can be awkward, and it only works on an inherent summon, so it's just dead against some decks. Like, if you play against it all they do is fusion summon, which you can't negate with this. But it's still a searchable negate. We still run it at 1. Then there's the Dogmatic engine I mentioned. I play 1 Ecclesia, 3 Nadir, and 3 Punishment. I only play 1 Ecclesia because Nadir can add it back from the grave anyway, so I don't feel the need to play more than 1. But I think you could play 2 if you wanted, because when I hard drew the Ecclesia, it did feel pretty decent. Engine's just good. Like I said, gives you a play going first, gives you more power and more abilities to destroy big monsters, which is something the deck struggles with. Cards are just good. Then I run Part of Extravagance and 2 Part of Duality as my generic consistency boosters. This deck doesn't special summon much, barely touches the extra deck, so these are basically just free pluses for us. And then finally, we have 3 Forbidden Droplet, 3 Solemn Strike, and 2 Solemn Judgment, rounding out the lineup of generic powerful spells and traps. And then there's the spicy stuff. Back in my day, let me tell ya, back in my day, we didn't have no Mystic Mine if we wanted to slow games down to a crawl and make our opponents miserable. No. We would pay 100 life per turn for Messenger of Peace, and we were happy about it. And I've decided to relive the old days with this deck. Messenger of Peace may look weird, and frankly, it's entirely possible it's not optimal and some other Floodgate would be better, but it is shockingly good in this deck, pun intended. Its restriction doesn't really affect you at all, because all of your monsters are under 1500 attack points, and it can do a good job of protecting your monsters that are in play and letting them keep attacking, which is something Mystic Mine can't really do. So I do like the card in the deck quite a bit. I wouldn't play 3 of it, but 2 feels pretty good. And finally, we have my absolute favorite card in the deck by far. Not the best card, but easily my favorite. It's Robin Goblin. Robin Goblin is a continuous trap that lets you discard random cards from your opponent's hand whenever a monster you control deals battle damage to them. This card is good, honestly. Like, I know it's surprising, the card looks bad, but it is quite good. Adding the hand rep to your Wat pokes makes your resource game a lot stronger, and almost more importantly, Goblin can chain block all your Wat effects. Goblin and the Wat are both mandatory effects that activate in the damage step, which means you can just, declare Robin Goblin and Chain Link 2, and suddenly your opponent can't Appaloosa your Cobra, they can't strike your Cobra. You can use it to guarantee Giraffe goes off if you do have follow-up in main phase 2. The card just, feels so good to play. It's so good getting those hand reps. It feels great being able to just ignore their negates. Again, I'm not convinced it's the greatest card, and you definitely can't play 3 of it, because there are times when you draw multiples and that feels bad, and there are times when you wish you did just have more disruption. But honestly, the card is so much fun. Adding it made the deck so much more fun to play. I love it so much, would never cut it. As for the extra deck, we are a Dogmatica Extravagance deck, which means we don't actually summon much of this. But we do have 2 Wat Chimera, which is the Wat boss monster. It can attack your opponent directly, just like the main deck Wats, and when it deals battle damage by direct attack, you can return a random card in your opponent's hand to the top of their deck. That is a really powerful effect, right? It's a hand rep that also locks up their next draw. Chimera is a monster you don't make very often, but when you do, you're probably going to win, because you can just keep hitting them and putting crap back on top of their deck, and they just have no way out of it. Powerful card you don't make very often, but when you do, you're happy to see it. Then we have 1 HTS Psychemus. This card, I'm gonna be honest, it's only in here because I lost 1 game to Dragoon and got mad. You never summon it. Got 1 Tri-Brigade Farragut. This is a Dogmatica target for Nadir and Punishment. When it's sent to the graveyard, you can shuffle a card in your hand back into your deck and draw 1 card. It's just, nice to send sometimes for additional cycling. Couple of generic links you never summon. Bagushka and Abyss Dweller are the only extra deck monsters you make on a regular basis, because sometimes on your second turn you have 2 monsters out and you just, would rather end on Bagushka path than having 2 Watt Cobras sitting on the field. Then there's Zeus and his Enabler. I've never summoned these. And then there's the rest of the Dogmatic targets. I run 1 Psyframe Lord Omega, 1 Titaniclad, only 1 because I only have 1 Ecclesia, so it's not useful all that often, and finally 3 copies of Entes. So, real quick, before we move on to watching a couple replays, I wanted to cover a few cards I didn't end up including in my deck that may surprise people. Foremost among these is Watt Hopper. For those who don't know, Hopper's effect is that your opponent can't target any other Watt monsters for attacks or card effects, meaning if you control 2 Watt Hoppers, your opponent can't attack or target anything. And that is powerful once you get to it, but the issue is, to get up Hopper Lock, you need to run the Hoppers themselves, which don't do much of anything on their own, and a bunch of cards to help special summon them, which means you have less room in the deck for defensive tools like trap cards, and it means you end up with more bricky hands. So I just, I tried it, I didn't like it, because it made your deck less consistent, and if the lock got broken, you usually end up being really, really vulnerable because you have less space for other defensive tools. So I prefer things like Messenger of Peace and the trap cards, which yes, are less powerful than the Hopper Lock, but don't have the same deck building cost, and don't take the same number of resources to get on the field. Next, I'm not running Mahunda or Pahunda. I tried those, and they honestly just didn't feel good to me. If the effects got negated, it just kind of ended your turn, which sucks. And even if they did go off and you got to make some Xyz monsters, it just, it didn't feel like strong enough payoff to justify the additional summons clashing with Thunder Seahorse and Pot of Duality. So I ended up just cutting those and deciding we're gonna stick with the slow, 1 normal summon a turn game plan. Finally, you may notice I am running 0, count 'em, 0 hand traps, and you may be asking yourself, Brino, what's your plan if you have to go second? And to that, dear viewer, my answer is lose. Now, I am being a bit facetious, but in all seriousness, I tried running hand traps in previous versions of the deck, and most of the time it felt like, 1 hand trap wasn't enough to stop your opponent from doing stuff. Right? Like, it just wasn't good enough protection to keep you alive. I've kind of hopped on it a lot at this point, but this deck really is fragile and does need really powerful protection tools, and for that reason, I decided the best way to play it was just going to be running more trap cards and stuff, and just accepting the fact that if I have to go second, the game's going to be hard. My one hedge for this is running Forbidden Droplets, which is a powerful going second tool, that also is good going first, because you can just set it. Alrighty, so lastly, I want to show you guys a couple of replays of me playing the deck to kind of show off what the deck can do. Fair warning for this first one, it's not a perfect game. I was super tired when I was playing, and I do make a couple of misplays, but it still does a good job of showcasing what the deck can do, so I still decided to include it. My opponent's on Weather Painter Kaijus, and they're going to go first and activate Prosperity, and they're going to take a Snowy Canvas off of this. Then they're going to Terraforming to get Numeron Network, and they're going to do the Numeron thing, summoning out the 4 Xyz monsters, and then linking them off into Appaloosa. On my turn, I'm going to go ahead and activate Pot of Duality, and this is going to get me my boy Robin Goblin, which I'm very happy about. Then I'll summon Giraffe, not going Cobra here because the Appaloosa's on the board, and Giraffe will Beta Negate because, like I said, the effect looks very scary. I'll Thunder Seahorse, which inexplicably doesn't get negated. Watt Train searches cancel, and I'll set my back row. On my opponent's turn, they're gonna go into another copy of Pot of Prosperity and get a Dimensional Fissure off of it, which they will then activate and go to battle. My Giraffe gets run over, very sad, goodbye Giraffe. And on my turn, I'm gonna normal summon Cobra and use Watt Train's effect to summon a second. And here, I'm gonna forget I had Chaining turned off in Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro from a previous game, so I don't get to activate Robin Goblin on that attack. But I do for the second one, and now it's gonna Chain Block the Cobra, Appaloosa can't negate it, I get a hand rep, I get a search, everything is great. So my opponent's gonna use Kaiju Slumber, get a turtle, give me the turtle, and summon their own Spooder and swing over my dudes. So on my turn, it's going to come back to me, I'm going to Thunder Seahorse again, and this time it will get negated, smartly, but this leaves me free to summon a Cobra. I'm going to attack directly because Cobra doesn't get its effect unless it direct attacks, and I don't care about a 1-8 Appaloosa really anyway. Get the Robin Goblin rep and search a fox. My opponent's going to run over Cobra, deal a bit of damage to me, very sad, and then activate Snowy Canvas in main phase 2, which I will Judgment, followed up with Watt Cancel on the Cloud. I've seen my opponent struggling to make plays the previous turn, so I figure negating the first thing they do is probably going to be good enough. Then the last Appaloosa negate comes out on Ecclesia's search, but I still get the monster, and Watt Giraffe will run into a Numeron wall, which very rudely dodges Robin Goblin and also ends my battle phase. I'll end on a Baguska, and my opponent will unfortunately have to just set and pass, unable to out it. Then I'm going to use my third Thunder Seahorse, summon Watt Pheasant, set one card, and pass the turn back to my opponent, who passes it right back to me. And then I will unceremoniously learn that Judgment doesn't work under Defeater. No one told me that. But fortunately, I can attack the Appaloosa with Baguska and swing for game with a Watt Pheasant. Alright, so this last replay is actually a game I end up losing, but it's still a really cool game with a bunch of back and forth, so I think it's worth including anyway. This is actually probably my favorite game I played with the deck in my time testing it. So let's get started. I'm gonna start the game off. I'm gonna activate Extravagance like the good player I am, draw a couple cards, set a couple back row, and then I'll summon Pheasant and want train for a Giraffe because I already have Cobra. My opponent is on Yosenju, which is very cool. They're gonna open with a Tenki, set 3, and I will strike their normal summon, because striking a Yosenju normal summon kind of ends their turn. So I'm gonna draw for turn, activate my second Extravagance, like a good player, and summon Watt Cobra right into Torrential Tribute. I will Watt Train, it's fine guys, but no it's not because they have another Torrential, and then fortunately Train forces you to summon as many as possible, so I can't really play around it. My opponent's gonna set one, summon a Yosenju. Again, I'm gonna negate the summon because negating their first summon ends their turn, and play the part of duality I ripped, letting me add a Watt Giraffe to my hand. Then I'm gonna summon the Giraffe, activate Robin Goblin, and go for a poke right into Drowning Mirror Force, which I was not expecting, but does make sense given that Yosenju sit in your hand. My opponent's gonna summon their Karma 3 and poke me. I can't do anything about it. It goes back to hand at the end of the turn. Next, I'm going to draw Dogmatic a punishment, set it, pass the turn, can't do much else. My opponent plays the second Tenki, getting Yosenju Izna. They're going to summon both monsters, and I will activate punishment, sending Enters to pop them both. So my opponent's just going to end their turn there, and I will draw into Nadir. I will search Ecclesia, sending Baguska, and this is going to come back to bite me later, because the last monster in my X deck is Farrajet, who I wanted to save to get a draw off the punishment. But that's not quite going to work out, as you will see in a bit. My opponent sets a couple cards and passes back to me. I resummon the Ecclesia that got bounced back to my hand, and they will chain Macro Cosmos. So I'm going to poke with Ecclesia, which gets me a hand rep off Robin Goblin. I'll set my back row, pass back to them, and they will summon a Yosenju Kama 2, which I cannot pop with punishment, because Farrajet only has 1600 attack points. So, the Kama 2 goes back to hand, and I'll go into Watt Cobra. Unfortunately, they will bounce my Robin Goblin on the attack with the Yosenju Sword Sting, but I still get my Cobra Search. This, unfortunately, means the Kama 2 is still in hand, and can get summoned again, and can run over the Cobra, leaving me at 150 life points. So I'm gonna draw for turn here, and normal summon my Watt Giraffe after activating Robin Goblin. I'm gonna poke. Unfortunately, I do miss the normal summonable monster, forcing me to immediately activate Messenger of Peace. My opponent then is going to end the game by drawing the third Tenki, searching Yosenju Kama 1, which can bounce a card on the field, removing my Messenger of Peace and attacking over my Giraffe for game. Unfortunate, I think I could have won this game if I had sent the Farrajet off Nadir and had the 2100 attack Baguska as my last punishment target, but you know, it was a good game anyway. Pretty cool back and forth between two off-meta decks. And like I said, ton of fun for me to play. And with that, we have reached the end of the inaugural episode of the Junk Box. I had a lot of fun with this one. Watch ended up being a pretty cool deck in the end. Poking your opponent to death with, like, little cute thunder animals was a lot of fun. Putting Robin Goblin in the deck in 2021 was great. I didn't expect to play this card originally, and then I found it while I was iterating on the deck, and it felt really good. So I really enjoyed this a lot, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching it too. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe if you want to, I really appreciate it. Leave a comment if you have any suggestions for ways I can improve future videos, or if you have any ideas of archetypes I should pull out of the junk box in the future. The next video will probably be out in about 2 weeks. I'm aiming to eventually release one video per week, but unfortunately after seeing how long this one took, it's just not realistic yet until I get more experience under my belt and I can slam these out quicker without having to redo takes so much. If you do want updates on when my next videos are gonna be, or you just want to see me post funny things occasionally, feel free to follow me on Twitter at beatdown, and I'll provide updates on when the next videos are going to be. That said, that is all I have to say. So thanks again so much for watching, and I will see you all next time on the Junk Box.